Hello and welcome to this Register webinar. Now, we are living in a post-hypercomposable world, as you know, and now let's dwell on that topic for a moment. We're living the dream of what IT platforms can bring to us. It's not true, is it? Actually, what we're here to do today is find out exactly what the reality is. I've got with me James Hall from HPE, Simon Birney from NGIT, channel partner, and Tony Locke from Freeform Dynamics. And I wanted to ask each of you, where are we in terms of reality compared to that living the dream when we talk to our customers? Maybe to you first, James.
Yes, I think a lot of organisations, everyone's trying to put together a strategy. And I think we've spent a lot of time working on the traditional applications that run businesses, and now I think organisations are focusing on, okay, how can I take social media or edge type computing data, and how can I put that into a platform and start to derive business value from it? So we've kind of done, been through the flash wave, and to some extent it's still happening, and customers are still transitioning away from kind of legacy storage platforms and moving forward. And now they're looking at.
We've got to build on that.
Yeah, we've got to build on that and understand what we can do next.
Okay, what can we do next, Simon? But don't give away the plot.
Do you know what? I really like the word that you used there, the hyper-composable. Someone's got to dream that up and do something with that.
I'm going to patent that.
Absolutely. Get there before everybody else does. Business outcomes. James was talking about that just earlier, and that's what people really want. They want to be able to use IT in a way that can really give the business benefits, so they can be better in whatever it is that they do. They want to be more competitive. They want to get more value out of their own business. And they want to do more with less. It's a terrible adage. Everyone's using it. But business outcomes is really what we're about.
What's the state of reality today? We're almost in a sci-fi world of having multiple realities. There are so many different options that things are so fragmented. You can have everything on-site, off-site, in all sorts of sites, all over the place. So we've got multiple options, and that fragmentation is getting harder and harder to look after.
Well, without further ado, this is exactly what we're going to be looking at. We're going to go through how infrastructure is changing and look at that fragmentation. We're going to look at how we can align IT to this environment that people are in. I'm going to look at the slide. And stack-based approaches, something that we talked about a lot as we were preparing this, and basically, what layers do you need, and how do you implement those layers, and what challenges does that cause? So in order to cover all of that, let's start with some data. Tony, we're at an inflection point.
We are indeed. Exactly as I just said, we've always been in a state of change. Things vary all the time. We never get things that are completely settled for any length of time whatsoever. But at the moment, as I said right at the beginning, we've got so many options, and old things never go away. So people are always looking to do more with their data center, and the data center is always changing. At the infrastructure level, at the management level, at the business pressure level on top of it. And it's interesting to see there that obviously business pressures are going up all the time for the majority of people. But there are some organizations where things are relatively constant in terms of the pressure that they're having, but the exact nature of those pressures might change over time.
Seems to be a bit of a kind of dichotomy where they're saying, 50% of people are saying, it's fine, we've got great. And they're saying, but the pressure's growing.
They're saying it's fine for now, but even when things are fine, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're as good as they could be. It means they're okay. So we're always in a position where we hope that things could get better. And we ran a survey with the audience about 5-6 years ago, asking people, what's your nirvana data center look like? Forget where you are today. If you had a completely greenfield site, what would it look like? And a lot of the things that came out of that survey in terms of looking for more and more automation, delivering things as a service rather than managing infrastructure, we're now getting in a position where people are beginning to see that become possible.
Challenge is you've got to make a decision. And when you make a decision, tomorrow there's always something new and better. There's always a shiny new object that somebody wants. And it's really tricky, we go and see customers every single day, and the conversations are always the same. How do I get better? How can I make these decisions? I want to get to cloud because I've seen it in the adverts in Coronation Street that I can just click here, move my entire business there, and everything's going to be fantastic. And we know that's actually not the case. So we're in this world where IT moves so quickly for everyone, whether you're on the consuming side, whether you're on the delivery side, and certainly inside the data center, you have to make a decision. The challenge then is there's 50 different answers to whatever question you're going to ask.
I think the other pressure that you see from a business perspective as well is, the companies that have, got hold of their IT infrastructure and have built, very agile platforms that enable them to move really, really fast, are then, diversifying their business and attacking other people, or other businesses that they would not normally expect that to happen. So, companies that I've worked with, that do properties, and there are a few of them where there's big sites, now going on to doing comparison of insurance and then selling that insurance, so therefore encroaching on the comparison websites. And they're doing that at incredible pace. So not only have you got, your own business people saying, look, we need something that makes us go faster and more agile. Okay, what does it want to look like? Well, I don't really know yet. But you've then got the added pressure of, new competitors that were not in your market before that are coming into your market at an incredible pace. Therefore you've got business pressure, and competitive pressure from here, which then forces that down into the IT teams. So it's almost all angles.
Like book-selling companies who sell data centers.
Yeah.
What this has on the impact on the infrastructure is that we've got to make decisions, but we want to make decisions that still allow us that flexibility, so that we're not locked in, we're not confined, we're not blocked from doing something new if we need to. And if we need to change the infrastructure, we need it to be malleable enough, open enough, that we can actually make that without having to rip and replace everything.
So there's that feeling that if you miss an opportunity to make a decision, it would have been the wrong one anyway because it's already out of date. Kind of, but you're forever kind of.
I would imagine there is a fair amount of that feeling from some organisations.
There's always the fear of that, but you've got to make decisions because there's always going to be something better or different tomorrow. But you've got to make a decision today, but make sure that the decision doesn't mean that when tomorrow comes, you don't regret what you did today.
The worst thing you can do is not do anything.
Exactly.
And I think if you go back 2 or 3 years, not making a decision and not doing that project probably had some impact, but not dramatic impact. Today, actually, it can have it's the difference between you being competitive in a market and you not being in it. And I think that's the big change. And that's what the internet has done, and that's what tablets have done. And it's all of those pressures, I think, that we see.
I'm just wondering if when you did the survey about IT Nirvana, whether you had the option, never mind, on there.
We had a similar option to that on there, but very few people actually took it. The audience out there know what they would like the ideal to look like. And they're basically the characteristics that we've been trying to build now for at least 5-10 years, to make it more automated, to make it more flexible, to make it more open, so that we're not afraid of making those decisions anymore. That's really where we want to get to, and we're getting closer.
I'm going to flick on to the next slide because it's a pull-push thing going on, isn't it? So this is one of yours.
It is. So trying to kind of pictorially view, but as I said in the intro, if we think about our traditional applications, the ERP systems, the billing systems, the things that run the business, they largely don't change, right? We know what they look like today, and we know what they're going to look like in 5 years, and we know how they're designed because someone says, I need this, 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 and this.
Still going to be selling stuff.
And we're still going to be servicing that, and that's kind of the traditional stuff. If you actually look inside a customer's data center, it's a very small subset outside of investment banking or something like that, because that's very different. But it's usually a very small subset of the applications and the actual data. I've travelled a lot around Europe. I always ask the question, it's usually about 25 to 30%. So then you've got all of these other applications, and this is where the focus is shifting to now, is, what do I do with these? I don't want to put them on that rigid platform because, I need the agility and the flexibility that something gives us. And that's where you see the drive towards either public cloud or building something on premise, because it's the spin it up, spin it down, I can try it, I can get rid of it, or do I build something software defined, because then I can use commodity hardware and just bolt things on and connect stuff to it.
Are you saying that the stuff that you might say as core systems is like only 25-30% of
for most organisations, it's quite a small amount.
The rest is other stuff.
The rest is other stuff. Yeah.
Wow.
It's and it's
a cornerstone, isn't it?
Yeah, it varies across A across Europe and A across every industry. Banking is very different to retail, for example. But actually, core systems and the amount of data that you have to store for those core systems is relatively small for most organisations. It keeps the business running, and that's why people keep it on premise. It doesn't often go off premise because you want to be able to bill, but it's all of the other stuff. So how do I take data from there, put it over here where I can connect lots of different applications to it, which I don't even know what they are yet because someone's writing them, and then derive more value. Things like, if you're a retail company, okay, I know all these people have bought that, where have they bought it, how do I look at doing stocking? So you see, or if you're an electricity company and you've got smart meters everywhere and you've worked out that actually, people are consuming too much energy on a Tuesday night. If I give them cinema tickets and get them out of the house, then it cuts my, they're the sorts of things that we're seeing.
How do you sign up for that?
Exactly, yeah. And so, but that's not, you're not going to build that on a traditional system. You're going to build that on a stack that supports the agility and those workload types that enable you to go and do that.
Does this, because we're here to talk about not necessarily the largest enterprises or the smallest, but the kind of the bit in between. Does this reflect?
Absolutely. It doesn't matter what the customer is. It doesn't matter what the size is. They all have the same problems. And there are compartments for. We're going to be moving on to what is this? A hybrid approach. There is no. We had this conversation earlier on. There's no one size fits all. There is no thing that you can buy down in PC World on a Saturday and bring it back to the office, plug it in, and it's going to solve all of your problems. And that is the challenge, because every single business has different needs. We see companies who absolutely need 90% of their infrastructure on-premise because it's what they do. We see other ones that need 25%. It just depends on how you need to consume that. If you were to compartmentalize it, what we typically see is sort of 3 compartments. One is your typical business applications like the email, collaboration, that sort of thing, starting to move out, very typically out into a public cloud, so whether that's serviced by the likes of Microsoft, Exchange, whatever that is. CRM tools, Salesforce has been around for a long time, companies like that, providing those sort of rock solid, it works, although I can tell you a story about some challenges that we've had when that goes off. We'll do that later on. And then you've got the middle tier, which is, it could be R&D, it could be test and dev, could be whatever those things are that's sitting with either Azure or whatever, you need to spin up, spin down. Great ideas, whoever thought that you could take away a database from an operating system and run it just in its own instance and pay just for execution, up and down 5 minutes, and I'm just going to pay for that. Fantastic ideas, but then you've got line of business. Then you've got the stuff that somewhere in that business somebody's absolutely accountable for, the stuff that cannot break. So then you're in the, well, where do I put it? It's the risk reward. I don't really want to have a data center, but I don't want to be caller number 1001 if something goes wrong in somebody else's data center saying, please, will you fix it?
So what I'm hearing is, we've got this nice picture of kind of a flow chart and tree walk and all that sort of thing, but actually the decision making is much more complex than that.
Always has been, and it always will be. And the issue here is that it's often the case that the business doesn't know what it needs today, never mind what it's going to need tomorrow and how that's going to vary. And the actual applications you're running might be the same, but even in the cloud there's no such thing as infinite infrastructure. You've got to pay for it. There are constraints. Getting your data up to that database in the first place, can be problematic, particularly if you're a mid-sized, smaller company where you don't have huge bandwidth. So how do you actually play with that and give yourself the ability to change things without having to really do something very, very different?
I think the big shift is, if you over the last 3 or 4 years, it's always been, how many CPU cores do I need? How much memory do I want? How many IOPS do I want to do? It's all speeds and feeds. And that conversation has changed dramatically now, actually, to, what does the data workload, what does the data look like, and therefore what platform suits it best, and what am I going to do with it? Because actually those types of questions define what the underlying infrastructure should look like. And as big vendors like ourselves, we spent years selling speeds and feeds, and so we're having to change the way in which we engage with customers and talk to customers, and that's why we've got partners that are doing it for us, because they're frankly ahead of us on that in some instances. But the whole conversation about how we talk about IT has fundamentally changed.
So it's from speeds and feeds to needs and deeds.
I like it. It's good. Might have to take
I'm
that
on
one.
fire, John. You're absolutely on fire.
But it's a big shift, and it's the IT guys are struggling with it because they would always previously it was the business, or you tell us what we need, and they said, well, we think it looks like this. Whereas now we're kind of saying, well, what's it got to do? How agile do you want to have multiple copies of it? And the business is starting to get more involved because applications are key.
How much agility do you want in that?
But it is.
How many agilities?
Yeah, but it's fundamental. Most of the time we are selling very fast CPUs, lots of memory, and very fast servers, but very fast networks and flash storage. Speeds and feeds is not dead because things aren't magic, but it's largely gone away, and it becomes a question now. Okay, business to business, what are you thinking about doing and what are you doing today, and can we make it faster, easier and more agile and therefore take cost out? it's a very different conversation to even 18 months ago.
I was going to say, it's the same conversation that we've really been having for the last 30 years. But the problem is that the infrastructure just wasn't able to deliver on that. And by the infrastructure, I include the people elements as well, because, you know, when you say that, you know, the business would say we'd need this, and when you tried to question them to get a bit more detail on it, they didn't really know what they needed. And today, with the ideas that have become very prevalent in the last 5 years, certainly in the last 10 years, about that we can be more flexible, that potentially we could reuse data, because before everything was just provisioned for, you know, the next 3 to 5 years, and you bought it up front because that was the only option. Now, with this more flexible infrastructure, you've got to be able to be, you know, able to change quickly. But the point is that the business still doesn't know really what tomorrow's going to bring, and the idea that you can reuse data in different ways is great, but there's some extra things coming along like GDPR that says, well, can you actually do that with that data or not without breaking the law?
Yeah.
So these are things that are going to become more and more prevalent. So having that visibility of what you've got is going to become even more important. And whether that's on-site or off-site, that visibility becomes very, very important.
There's a kind of, we've got 3 people in a row here, and I'm thinking we've got the consulting person, we've got the building person, and we've got the kind of manufacturing, but yeah, the OEM, if you like.
Yeah.
I'm a consultant.
And you're saying that or the person thinking about it more than doing it, and then the person doing it more than thinking about it. But the conversation that you've been saying has been happening for a long time. You're now saying that's the main conversation we're having, and you're now saying it's now becoming the main conversation that you're having.
There's another element that James brought up, and Tony's repeated it: cost. Cost has always been a factor. But there's this concept of utility compute. And we had this debate earlier on. There is no utility compute. If we want to be, you know, pedantic about this, there's no big pool of compute that you can turn a tap on like you can with water, or, you know, plug things in and you consume more electricity. And the nirvana is there. It would be a wonderful world that if we could sit in you know, the CEO has got his smart meter with Gaz Lecky and Compo, or whatever you want to call them, and he can see how much compute he's using, but it doesn't exist right now. So the challenge is that you've got a business wanting to try and get to this consumable, or hyper-consumable, we'll use that today? Hyper-consumable model, but they can't do it. So then business is challenging IT to come up with a way that it can be flexible, it can be agile. But hang on a minute, the FD's just had a purchase order put on his table for a 5-year plan. Well, how does that work? So you've got all these elements sort of challenging each other all the time, and we're stuck in the middle having conversations about it.
Let's stick with you, Simon, because these are the conversations you're having right now.
Absolutely.
And so you put this little picture together to kind of reflect how these conversations
we did.
go.
So this is all this is for really is just to spawn a conversation, or in some cases deliberately stop a train of thought, because sometimes we'll go in and we'll engage with an end user, and we have 2 differing sort of situations we find ourselves in. We find ourselves in, I've already got I already know what I want, so I'm just going to tell you and you're going to give me a quote idea because I'm on a journey. Or we're actually seeing people right now who they were looking at the public cloud, they thought they were going to go with the public cloud, we might have talked to them 2 years ago, we go back in 18 months later and I can't do what I thought I could do.
Yeah, I haven't quite got there.
Absolutely. And my kit dies in 6 months' time, or I've got this hefty bill. So can you fix this quickly? Because actually I need to buy some stuff. So we go through a process, and part of our adage is, you know, yes, we will do things quickly. But we came up with this really to say, look, hybrid cloud is a journey. It's not something where you go into Tesco's and buy a 25 grand gift card and give it to IT. It doesn't work like that. And everyone, as we said, has different ways of how this applies to their business. So, you know, some of the things that we've got on here, we talked earlier on about data, file services. That's usually one of the biggest consuming items of data storage. Do you really want to be going and spending a shed load of money on flash storage and sticking data on there that you haven't touched in 10 years? I don't know, do you? Don't you?
It'd be great if you
However, the challenge is that you then haven't got the time to actually slice and dice it. So you just put it there anyway because it was the quickest and easiest decision to make. So, you know, again, there's so many different factors. Where you are in that cycle of how to make a decision, what we try and do is say, look, try and disperse some of that, because file services can live, if you do it right, in a public cloud, providing line of business services, providing the stuff that you need now, providing the stuff you're using now is available right now. And that provokes part of the conversation.
And it also comes down to then, well, what are the different cost models? Because
Absolutely.
cloud, isn't a consistent utility,
No.
even at the best of times. There are lots of different ways of paying for it, the same way that there are now lots of different ways of paying for your on-premise IT. So is this data that you're putting up there going to be stuff that's never going to be touched, or that you're only going to touch it occasionally? Because then you might want stuff that's really cheap to just put there, but you end up paying to retrieve it.
Yeah.
And one of the big issues today is this unpredictability. The data that we thought we're never going to look at again, suddenly, 2 years from now or even 2 weeks from now becomes a hot item again. And therefore we're now suddenly stuck with lots of retrieval costs that we hadn't programmed in. The whole flexibility of paying for things is great on the one hand, but really hard to budget for, because most businesses are not built for paying that way. Some are, but they are very much, the minority compared to everybody else.
You also mentioned a good point there, which is, I thought I was going to do this, now I can't, now I've got a hefty, refresh cycle coming up, and 6 months is not a lot of time to do it. And I think, from my experience, having worked with all types of different organisations, always good to think about having 2 strategies. That's my primary one. But in the background, I need to run a secondary one in case this one doesn't work. And I don't think that happens very much at all. And I would kind of brand big organisations and medium-sized ones in, because in life, in general, if you're doing something, most of the time, if it's important, you're going to have a plan B just in case it goes wrong. So I think from a strategy point of view,
2 holidays planned then.
yes,
Fantastic.
Unless you're asking
from a strategy point of view, this is what I'd like to do. But underneath that, in case any of these things, and within that strategy, there's got to be milestones, right?
In the worst case.
Yeah. If I get to this milestone, and I still haven't really achieved what I should have achieved from that milestone, then I need to probably drop into Plan B, or I need to at least understand what Plan B looks like. Because the biggest thing that I see from customers is, I really want to do that, but I've got 3 months until my maintenance renewal is up, and I've got to get off.
I think that
and that's what stunts these kind of strategies from happening. And it's every size organisation that has the same problem. That one strategy with a plan B is always a good way to go.
And that really reflects the whole concept of hybrid IT.
Yes.
The fact that we need to have different elements and different ways of putting things together. That's always been the way in IT, but now we've got the extra component of outside cloud or hosted services, whatever. But the point is the mix between them will vary. So having a plan B is great, but the strategy has got to be all encompassing, and it's a question of how do you make the decisions, where do you make the decisions, how quickly can you make them, and how do you fund them.
And who's involved? We'll come on to that later.
But it
as well.
all depends on having visibility, both of the business needs at a business need level, which sometimes even the business guys don't always have a clear handle on until you get in and question them. And then, well, what are the options and how do they match to that? And
It's
how can I
about
change
starting
them?
to have those conversations, which we are going to get to. And speaking of conversations, if you do have any questions, any burning points about how to manage costs, about strategy, about when are they going to get on and talk about whether or not it's all about SSD, which we're not, by the way, on this particular one, then please do let us know your questions, let us know your stories, let us know your anecdotes, and we'll bounce them around with the panel. But the good news is, Tony, that it's not that people are completely hamstrung and doing nothing. They do have some of this stuff already in place, the organisations that you're surveying.
Yeah, well, the Reg readers out there, they're living this, so they know this. They've got plans to, modernise their data centres. That's, life as usual, business as usual. There's plans to move some things to the cloud or move things back from the cloud, and whether that cloud is a traditional public cloud or a hosted service, these are all options, and they all have a place for different workloads at different times. And the guys and girls out there, they're living this, so they know that, and it's a question of how sometimes to get the business to realise it, because of all the marketing that's been done to say, public cloud's the answer to everything, why are you still doing anything on site? That's an education process that, the folks out there are trying to struggle with some of their business leaders, and have been doing for some time.
But I think some of that can be addressed, because if you see, and you see it all the time, we've got a X percentage public cloud strategy. Sometimes in the business, what they're not seeing the agility that potentially public cloud could offer. What they're seeing is a consumption model that they like the look of, one that's unpredictable, granted, which you pointed out, which catches out lots of people, but actually from an IT perspective, we can actually say, look, if it's the model that you want in terms of the consumption model, we can do that on premise, and we can keep control of everything. And if it's on premise, we can control the costs that are hidden about moving data backwards and forwards. We know they're not going to happen because we own it. So I think from an IT and business perspective, is it public cloud, or is it the consumption model and the agility that it perceives to deliver what you're after? Because if it's those two things, they can very often be done on premise in the same kind of billing mechanism, probably for less.
It's perception, isn't it?
It is perception.
It's all about how the business perceives what it is it's trying to do.
We actually have a question directly on this point, so I'm going to throw it in, and then we'll broaden out. So this is from Byron. Nice name. Does the panel feel that cloud / hyperconverged / fog computing, thank you, Byron, is actually going to drive cost savings to the businesses that consume these on-prem, off-prem solutions? So the big theory is it's all about saving money, or is it same costs but it's moving from one cost model to another cost model?
So I'll give one point up. So you can only see if it's going to save money if you absolutely understand how much it costs you today. And I can tell you now, you go right up to the big enterprises like the investment banks and all the way down, it's very, very hard to say that to store 1 gig of my data on premise costs me this, and I can then compare it to, not many people know that. So you can't really answer that question unless you have an absolute handle on what you are spending, and that is everything from a cable that goes into the back of a server to a set of hands on a keyboard to overtime. Otherwise the comparison is not fair, because just saying I can buy 10 gig of storage here for this price or that in one of the public cloud providers does not incorporate everything else.
IT is, for a business, IT is a pain in the backside. It's a constant moving target. You look at where we are now with the SSD conversation. We're into terabytes and terabytes now. 10 terabyte drives coming out in Flash. Crazy. We were talking earlier on. I remember the days when I was getting excited about someone wanting to buy a 4.3 gig drive off me.
I remember those.
For 20 grand or whatever it was.
I go before that.
Very cause Russ.
Absolutely, yes, indeed. So, to answer Byron's question, James is absolutely right. You've got to try and do some compare and contrast. But you've got to accept that the Moore's Law, 18 months' time, something's going to come along which is the same price, twice the capability. So as long as you've built that into your mechanism, that at some point you are going to be paying more, because you just are. Great company, but there is a very well-known CRM who will charge you about £100 a gig to store data in their CRM, naming no massive names. Okay. And £100 for a gig of data these days, we can buy a thumb drive for
a lot less than that.
It's an issue that we've been asking the Register audience about since cloud as a term became very popular. And whilst a lot of the marketing around cloud has been focused on it's cheaper, the truth is that the folks out there have experienced that that's not the case. Occasionally it is. Sometimes it isn't. The reason why people go to the cloud is very much along the issues that James and Simon have been talking about. It's about agility. It's about flexibility. It's about I don't quite know what I need to do, so I'm going to start here and see how it goes, and then get a better understanding for me to work out what I'm going to do on a longer term. The cost driver for cloud really still exists only in the marketing to non-IT executives, because the IT folks know that it's difficult to measure, it's difficult to compare and contrast, but also it tends not to be true. So therefore, it's more about the flexibility and the options that it provides. And if you can do that on site, then it becomes an even more complex question to answer.
I think one of the challenges is, there isn't a tool today, and I'm using the word tool because I don't know whether it be software or hardware, but there isn't solution. What you can't do is put a black box into your data center and you tell the black box everything that you paid for in your data center, and it magically comes up with a number. And that today is probably the challenge as to why you can't work out, what's...
We can compare that to robots.
companies are trying, we are trying to help customers with software that kind of says this is what it is here and this is what it is there. But and it comes back, and it's probably jumping on to the next slide. But when you're thinking about what should be in what place, whether that is on one type of storage or a different type of storage in your data center or in the public cloud, you can't really do that until you understand what the data looks like and how it's accessed.
And who's
using
Well,
it.
Because this really ties into the stuff that we've been talking about here. It's the flexibility that's in the infrastructure now. It's really difficult to allocate costs. You know, in the past, you had a project, some department paid for it. That was very easy. But with shared infrastructure, it's a political game as much as anything else. How much power is being used, how much CPU is being used, how much manual, operations management is taking place on this system for each application and service when they are changing day by day, minute by minute almost. That becomes a major issue. So you just can't tackle it at that granular detail.
Well, let's just take a moment to reflect, because it just so happens we've arrived at exactly the halfway point in this webinar. We've arrived at exactly the big question in this webinar. We've got Byron, who asked the perfect question to give us the perfect setup. If we can't start from all of those things we've been talking about so far, where can we start? Maybe a better place is to think about the applications. What do you think, James?
Good intro, I like it. So this is, so I use this slide a lot, although you've made it look pretty for me.
I love moments like this.
You made it look pretty, which is good. So, and it's really, it's not, I wouldn't say it's to highlight, primary and secondary data. I'm using those terms because they're smart city terms, right? And they are kind of understood. And we're not talking about necessarily primary applications and secondary applications, because you have a billing system that generates bills and gets you money in, but actually you might have a secondary system that gives you all of the business analytics and intelligence to go and attack the people to go and sell something to, right? So just because it's, the whole tier 1 and tier 2 thing, in my mind, is getting very blurred. I'm looking at this more from an application point of view. So if you look at the primary applications, or at least the primary stuff up there, CRM, billing, we know how these things work, right? The guy that owns it says, I want, a server running this OS with this much storage, and today it's this much, 5 terabytes, and it does 10,000 IOPS, and in 5 years it's going to grow 25% year on year. It's really straightforward, it's really easy. That's my 25% or 30%, whatever it kind of looks like.
That part of the problem solved.
And we've kind of done that, right? Because that's what we've been doing for a long time. It's then say, okay, what else have we got? And this is where the business conversation comes in, and this is where we talk about what does the data look like, how and who will access it, and what do I want to do with it? Because, and there's 4 simple questions, and there are more. There will always be more, but those 4 simple questions will help us determine, okay, what sort of platform should it sit on? If it is a structured data set where I want to be able to have lots of things asking it questions, it's probably going to be a block-based storage solution, and I'm going to put that on premise, and I'm going to make it as flexible as I can. If it is here's 100 terabytes of file data that no one's looked at for a year, do I then look at, do I consider that tertiary? Because no one's going to delete it, because no one wants to delete data unless there's compliance reasons to do so. But I want to be able to get to it, but I don't need to be able to get to it in the same speed as something else, because it's not a business decision. So, what we haven't done yet is really talked about products. What we're saying is, okay, what does the access pattern look like? How big is the data set? What do I want to do with that data set? Because then that starts to define the stack that sits with underneath it, and also lets me say, do I need it on premise? If I'm not going to look at it, but I'm keeping it because basically someone's too scared to get rid of it, can I go and put that somewhere really cheap in public cloud?
This is quite an easy thing to say, that this is where you should be talking. I mean, with Simon, are these the kinds of conversations? Are people happy to have these discussions?
They are. The challenge is that when you've got 6 months to go, you don't want to be trying to audit 300 machines.
Just give it to me.
Absolutely. So you end up, those drivers come back down to cost. So you have this desire, you go on this journey of, yes, I know I need to do a good job here. I've got a chance, I've got budget, I've got options. And that just falls off the end of a mountain somewhere, because they can't make those kind of decisions, which is why what we've tried to do is try to look at, well, if you could compartmentalize them, put them in those 3 buckets of, what can live in a public cloud, what can live in a software as a service type, whether it's the Office 365s or this world, that sort of thing. The rock solid, it works, we say rock solid, asterisk in the corner. Private cloud. However, private cloud, I don't want a data center, or I don't want a big data center, or I want to reduce 10 racks down to 1 rack. There's all sorts of different permutations in that. So we're asking 2 questions here. We're asking, what do I want to do with my applications, some of which I don't even know that I want them yet, versus how do I provide that underpinning infrastructure to allow me to branch out, whether it's vertically, horizontally, diagonally, wherever I'm going to go, I need something that's going to be a cornerstone. And that becomes a real challenge because IT often isn't empowered to be able to make all those decisions. They've got to interact with the rest of the business, but the business is tasking them. So then they're coming back with answers, but the business is saying, well, I don't know how to interpret what you've said.
Yeah,
so I'm just going to put a cost. Yeah, I'm just going to put a cost to that. And you guys like flashy things in the corner with fairy lights on, and I'm going to give that to somebody else, and we're going to knock the price out of that because somebody's been in to see me from ABC company who says they can do it 10 times cheaper, and I saw it on Coronation Street.
The other thing on these is, if you look at the attributes for these kind of primary, secondary, and tertiary, primary is because they're the crown jewels, right? It's all about availability, right? And then you can really simplify it now. If you then look at the secondary stuff, where we're not sure what it is yet because we haven't bought the application or someone hasn't written it, or we've got a whole load of data which we know we can ask really valuable questions, we just haven't worked out how yet. That whole area then becomes all about agility. What platform can I build that starts like this, that I can scale this way in a stack-based approach that gives me the maximum amount of agility? And by that I mean doing stuff with the data, whether it's snapshots or connecting stuff to it. And when we look at tertiary, which is I'm not going to delete it because I'm too scared, is really focused around cost and scale. Cost and scale could be tape, could be on-premise, could be object storage, could easily be public cloud.
Let me just summarise what I've got in my head. I think I'm getting this, but it's starting to look like a cube. So I need to. So what you're talking about, primary, secondary, and tertiary, is essentially two parts. One is what you're most like, what you're doing, and it can be fast, medium, and slow.
Yeah.
So the fast stuff and the slow stuff, but it's all standardised. So you've got two dimensions there, going of it's more standardised, and whether or not you need it to be really accessible versus archival kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Then the other dimension is it stuff that's business as usual kind of stuff versus it's the stuff that we don't know we're going to need yet. And that's where you need to start having the agility built in.
Yeah.
Is that
I think it's
fair?
Yeah, I think so.
That's a nice picture. Why don't we have that picture?
One qualification I'd make of that cube of yours, John, is it's more like a Rubik's Cube.
Yes.
Because whilst
all of my cubes always are.
Whilst the availability and the access might be defined for some things, there'll be bits of that data that you actually want to move into the secondary data for access. It's not as fixed as it used to be, and more accurately, you're going to have to move those cubes around quite quickly, and God knows what sort of pattern you're going to end up with.
Does this mean we're going to need some software to help us define it, Tony?
We're always dependent on software.
It's orchestration, isn't it? If you then need to start shifting stuff around.
It's about orchestration, it's about automation, it's about management, and the trendy term at the moment is obviously software defined and software defined everything. I suspect that's the lead-in that you're looking for here, John.
I can see it on the next slide.
So think about what that is, though, because this was a big topic 5 years ago. If you think what's automation going to deliver, actually I've got a bunch of guys that spend their entire time shepherding or configuring bits of stuff in the data center. So it consumes all their time. If I can automate so you're not talking about boiling the ocean. And this is what happened 5 years ago. It was all about boiling the ocean and automating everything. You probably don't need to. If you can take, the basic configuration tasks that consume time, like configuring storage and configuring networks and provisioning a VM and stuff like that. If I just take those away from my operations team, I'm going to give them probably 35% of their day back to go and help build things like this. Okay, now I've got some time to go and talk.
Provide value.
And then, if you choose the right products, because, we're all taking telemetry data from all of our products these days, and we're applying machine learning and we're helping operationally, leave that to our systems. We'll do that. So we'll tell you when we think something's going wrong. We'll tell you when you need to do this. And that's maybe, depends on the size of the estate, right? But it could be another 25 to 30%. So all of a sudden, by going through this process and looking at the agility piece, you've potentially given your ops guys who are running around like headless chickens at 100 miles an hour, and I bet there's a few watching this that will relate to that, giving them 50% of their time back to go and actually talk to the business and then actually have some time, not the rush job, to go and design a platform or think about a platform that will accommodate all of these things that they know about or don't know about.
Come blinking out into
Absolutely.
Exactly.
But again, it's about the business. I mean, we've got a client at the moment, and it's a fantastic conversation he's having. Chief Operating Officer has said to him, look, tell me what your Nirvana looks like. They've gone away, they've done an internal, they've said, this is what we'd like to get to. His answer was, how long is it going to take you to get there? He said, about 2 years. Cloud first strategy, the usual headlines. And he said, okay, fair enough, how much is it going to cost? He's gone and done a costing exercise, he said it's going to cost X. Fine. How much to keep the lights on? And how much to demonstrate to me that I can go back to the business at an exec level and show that IT needs that investment, but they're going to do it on a shoestring for now until they can get to that. I'll invest that in you, and they've done something which is really interesting. They've broken the cycle. And that's a really important part. If you're going to try and adopt a new strategy, you have to somewhere break a cycle. Otherwise, you're just going to get on the refresh cycle, or you're going to buy, how did we used to do it? You buy your storage, or these days you buy the data center in a box because you've got your hypervisor, you've got your... So, but back in the day it was, well, you know, the server refreshes next year, and then the year after that it's the
network and then
storage.
it's
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's backup.
So you have
right.
to break a cycle. So what does software defined lend itself to? It does give the ability where we're seeing some businesses start slowly to break away what they can.
So you architect it
Absolutely.
up
And
front, but
you know,
then
and they effectively dip
build
their
over
toe in
time.
some respects. I mean, God, you know, going back sort of 15 years ago, maybe even further, when we were all playing with VMware, where there was only 3 machines and we were hiding away in a cupboard somewhere because we bought the licenses, and then all of a sudden, boom, everybody was buying VMware because it was the next best thing. But actually, that's the next challenge, isn't it? Because we bring out, we evolve, we bring out new technologies which are going to bring out benefits to a business, and then we consume, and we consume at a rate of knots, and then the infrastructure underneath can't necessarily keep up.
What Simon hasn't actually mentioned, of course, is the fact it was a bit of a dodgy phone line when they were having this conversation, and he had to say hello, 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 hello. But that's another story.
But
Tony,
this has really put, you know, the real world bricks and mortar around the stuff that we were talking about earlier. You know, we have to make a decision. How do we make a decision that allows us to do something we know is going to work today, but isn't going to bind us into doing the same thing tomorrow, get us off that refresh? And that's something that, again, that the register audience have told us time after time on the surveys, that, you know, put something in, try it, you know, for a particular thing, and, you know, hope that that's the platform that you can expand out from.
and they are quite keen, and if we do flick on to the next slide, they are quite keen on the software-defined model, aren't
Well,
they?
you can see that the software-defined models maybe not quite as, you know, black and white accepted as that. You know, there are still people out there that need to actually trust that it's more than marketing hype.
This
You know,
does look like a build
it's-
heading in the
it's-
right direction.
It's
but
heading in the right direction, but
reticence.
we're not there yet. There's
Yes.
a degree of education, and we still need a lot of trust, because almost everybody today is defining what they're doing as software defined in the same way as in the past. They've defined everything as being cloud, and they've defined everything as being whatever. So software defined has become the marketing hype term of the current age, and people need to know, well, which of these are real? Which of them can I trust? Which of them can I make those bets on that are going to allow me to move forward confidently?
But also,
build from.
in the kind of the mid and the large organisations, who's going to look after it? Because, you know, you have a tower that does this, and a tower that does storage, and a tower that does networking. If I move everything to software defined and run it on commodity hardware, who owns it?
And
And that's the
issues
challenge,
as well.
right? That's a challenge for
We
organisations.
ran a survey on the register last week, and I only just scanned the results last night, but we'll have some interesting answers on that one
There you
coming
go.
So you've
forward.
got dependency and support then, haven't you?
Yes.
So, you know, what happens when something goes wrong?
Yeah.
And who fixes it?
Yeah.
And you can see here that the idea of actually multi-skill in teams is well accepted, you
Yes.
know, across the board. You know, the people out there doing the work now, they know that there's value in that for them, you know, as well as job
Well,
protection.
they do, but we talk to businesses at a high level who don't. And, you know, as far as they're concerned, they've seen the advert,
Yeah.
and they can go and,
I
you
don't
know,
need my guys.
they can, absolutely, they can right-size IT, because
Yeah.
I can save money there, can't I? That's not a great place to be, because actually they're seeing IT as a cost. They're not seeing it as an enablement.
No.
And retraining people who understand how the nuts and bolts work, to understand business value, surely is a better way to use those individuals, rather than, oh, well, let's look at trying to score out 10%
But
of
the
our
ones
workforce.
the ones that are seeing IT as an enablement are the ones that are attacking other industries.
Absolutely.
Because they're thinking, oh, I can get into that
Well,
market
yeah, I mean,
really
well,
fast and really
if,
easily.
If you're a cloud provider, what are you going to say?
Yeah.
No,
You're going to say it's
yeah.
the best thing since
It's
sliced.
not just about being a cloud provider. We've done research after research after research, and we've analysed the results in depth. to find that, yep, the organisations that do value their IT teams actually tend to have better business results at the end of it. And it's almost a feedback cycle that you get going, because the IT is delivering, so therefore IT finds it easier to be trusted by the business, which makes the process of getting investment easier.
Exactly.
And whereas the ones that are, where the business doesn't recognise that, they tend to have a negative loop going, and their results fall off. And so that's business as usual, and they've got to change. But that relies to a degree on some of the marketing hype that's been going on, trying to tell those business execs about a fantasy land that doesn't exist, and get them to accept that, hey, well, maybe that was a story and it's not real. But getting the communication working between business and IT is still a challenge.
Very
and
important.
Been there, done that, and it's something that IT needs to get better at, but it's also something that I think business is now willing to hear more about, because 15, 20 years ago, if IT failed, the business could probably keep on running. Now, most businesses know that if IT fails, they've got significant issues.
And the challenge that at a business level is, if we had this conversation earlier on, if you look at what's happened since the iThingies have come out, there's an app for that. There is a belief that we've gone from sort of business IT creating the commodity world to almost a commodity world driving business people saying, well, why can't I do that? Why is IT telling me 18 months to do something? Why? And IT is struggling to react because it's a much bigger scale.
And as you say, with the refresh cycle thing,
but it's also that the needs of the consumer are different from the needs of the business, and sometimes the business execs don't see that because the marketing's educated them in the wrong way.
Absolutely, but they've got an app.
Let's pick up on that point.
But the app's got significant infrastructure running behind it. That's a business infrastructure.
Precisely.
We've got 15 minutes left, so we're going to work through a bit of a build in terms of, so what can you do? And it does start from the apps. And I know that, with all this marketing hype that's going on about IT Nirvana, I would certainly give it a curt response. But let's get on to, if we are going to put apps first, applications, to your point, what does that actually mean in data terms? So the first question was, what does that mean in terms of how that imposes different requirements on the infrastructure?
So, on the slide, there's a very simplistic view, right? So there's two trains of thought. There's this is the kind of the original technical way of looking at it. So rather than getting into the speeds and feeds of things, it's okay. If I look at what the profile of the application is, so I want to understand what it is. I want to understand what the data looks like. I want to understand how I'm going to access it, because that helps me define what, whether it's an availability platform, agility platform, or something like public cloud. But we can look at it in much more simple terms, right? So if I look at my primary apps, typically they're going to be crown jewels. We know which ones they are. And then when we scan the rest of them, okay, what type of characteristics do they have? Do they need to be really, really fast, really low latency? Do I need to protect them with zero data loss? And if they fall into, or I want automated failover, because if it fails, then blood starts running down the walls. 2 or 3 boxes to tick. If it's in one of those, then we're going to put it in that bucket, and it's going to go with the crown jewels applications, and it's probably going to stay on that platform. When we then start,
this is Pareto principle stuff.
Yeah,
isn't it? It's like, is it the real stuff that needs to be?
It's a way to start. And then if I take a whole bunch of applications and say, well, do they need to be blisteringly low latency and speed, or is it really about size, scale, and agility? Do I need to replicate it synchronously, or can I just make sure I've got an offsite copy every hour or once a day, or just even backing it up in some instances? And if I think about the primary ones, I kind of know what they look like today, and I know what they're going to look like in 5 years. If I look at the secondary, and I think, right, it doesn't need to be that fast. I don't really need the same service level. Today it's this big, and I've got no idea what it's going to look like in 5 years. That's helping you drop applications into the bucket. So if you're getting absolutely nothing from the business, profile them in this manner, and then looking at the secondary one, is it just a big
just 3 buckets?
Just very very straightforward. Because if the business doesn't know, and they're saying, well, your IT, you tell us, which is, well, how many times have we heard that? This is a good way to go and profile it, because you can go on
3-bucket strategy to IT.
But it's a simple way to start, and that's what we're looking for, right? But the problem we have is we boil the ocean all the time. We don't really need to boil the ocean.
The other element is to make sure that the business understands that there are cost implications to this, because otherwise some business people will always say everything needs to be blisteringly fast when they don't.
If anyone's got any more questions, I was going to say, then if anyone does have any more questions, thank you, or it's going to be Byron all the way for question man of the match. on this particular webinar. So let us know if you've got any more questions or thoughts at this point as we go more into the how. And then once we've got those 3 buckets, you can drill down and say, well, how are we going to respond to those 3 buckets?
And again, this is so if you think about it's always cost, right? So bucket 1, where it's the stuff that we know, it's the stuff that most businesses have been running for 15, 20 years. Might they be replatformed them? Yes. But if you asked the guy that owns the billing system and said, how big was it 5 years ago? How big is it now? And how big is it going to be 5? He'll give you that data. He'll know because he's got all of the historic information on it.
Yep.
And therefore, things like that, and obviously now we're talking about maybe 25 or 30% of the overall data set. So I'm not buying a huge lump of storage, but it's much smaller and it's predictable. We are still seeing CapEx as I'm still seeing CapEx as the primary mechanism for
absolutely.
that. When we come into bucket 2, which is today it looks like this. I think it's going to be this big, but I don't know whether it's going to be horizontal or northeast southwest. I'm not really sure. That's when we're seeing the kind of the utility type conversations start, because that's where they're starting to think, well, if it's really unpredictable, isn't that public cloud?
And that's where you've got to break the cycle.
And that's where you've got to break the cycle. And then you start to look at, okay, what does the platform look like? And how do I build a platform that can scale this way and that way? Really important. And then, if I'm going to make it consumable to the business who in their mind think that, public cloud payment mechanism is awesome, how do I go out and find, a partner or a vendor that's going to help me build my cost per something per month model? And that's what we typically see for those areas, because
and be able to build the business for it, or at least blame the business.
Exactly.
For it.
What you don't want to do is, I think it's going to be 100 terabytes, going to buy 100 terabytes, and after 2 years you've used 10, right? No one wants to go down that road. So if I, as a team, we say, well, I can put 5 on the floor, and I can bill you for this, and then I'll put 5 on the floor, which you don't pay for yet. But when you reach 50% of it, then you start paying for that, and we'll just scale it as we go. Exactly, which is really what public cloud is offering, right? Is that pay-as-you-go type model. And bucket 3, we're driving cost. It just becomes a case of, do I want it on premise because I'm precious about my data, or there's compliance reasons, or in some instances it's almost the easiest bucket to go. This stuff is going out there. I've ticked my public cloud strategy box. And that's very, very common.
And that's the kind of oldie.
And that's just the
high
stuff.
Quality.
It's the stuff.
You're not wasting
all
money on
and MPEGs that you store, that you shouldn't store in your company systems, all that kind of stuff.
The interesting thing is,
absolutely.
The interesting thing now is that in the past it was really difficult to do that flexibility and grow inside the business, particularly on storage. Those are going away to a large degree, so it's still, you have to think about it and plan for it, but it's much easier to do than it was in the past. So the technology has caught up closer to our nirvana ideas.
There's an interesting conversation that goes on, and we see this. We have people, and they talk about bursting into the cloud. What does that mean? What do you really want by bursting into the cloud? And they
something no pilot ever wants.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, absolutely. Take it from me. So what they want is they want a platform, but what they want is this ability where they can say, well, actually, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I want to know that I can take my entire infrastructure and make it bigger out there without having to buy for it now. It doesn't exist. You just can't do that. Well, it's not a balloon that you can expand and contract.
Stick with you, Simon, because we had a debate before we put this as we were putting this presentation together, because we wanted to put your platform up on the thing. But you were very keen to stress it's just one answer. It's not the answer.
And this is just,
and that fits with everything that we're saying.
If we were to look at this is a cornerstone. Our experience is that everybody wants cloud first, and the nirvana is a fantastic nirvana. And we've been in IT for a number of years. I think we're at least 30 years off being able to actually have a utility compute, if you want to call it that. But we see people who, if you actually ask the guys who are on the 100th floor, what they want is they want their line of business somewhere that they can prod it, poke it, see it breathe, see the heartbeat, and they want to be able to get in the lift and go all the way down to the basement where they keep the albino IT people and kick the living bejesus out of them to make it work.
Yep.
Is that how you say it? Whatever.
It's how Nirvana say it.
Is that how it? Yeah. Fair enough. I'll remember that for the future.
Okay.
So our experience is that they want something where the living, breathing cornerstone of the business is where they can see it. They want to hear it purr. That's not that they don't have the nirvana where they want it to go somewhere, but even when you've got the ability to have SLAs, whatever those SLAs are, if something goes wrong, you are in a bucket with somebody else. No matter who you are, no matter how big the bank is, we were talking about this earlier on, you know, it doesn't matter. You're in a queue.
Giveaway there, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Public is the
You are part of a shared resource. You are not number one. Your IT department is number one. So what we've decided to do is say, look, from a stack approach, do something which gives you that flexibility, gives you the ability where you can, you know, the idea of this slide is to say,
personal hosted private cloud.
absolutely, make it small, make it fast, make it reliable, make it resilient,
And make it scalable.
and make it scalable. But do it in a way that can give you, you know, drastic reduction in either rack sizes. We're starting to get into the speeds and feeds, but that is realistic, whether it's in a hosted data center or in your own data center or wherever that is an important cost consideration. Then you have a platform to build off and to.
And I'm
that's
very
what we're
pleased
seeing.
that we are actually linking to the title of the presentation, because it is all about delivering that platform, but it's a very complex platform, obviously.
Absolutely.
The important point here is that it's not about cloud first, it's about cloud capability first. You know, so that you've got that flexibility, you've got that agility. You might have variable ways of paying for it. You've got the ability to grow and expand as you need to. But it's about capability, not about, you know, sticking it out somewhere. You know, it might be good for some things, but not for everything.
We've got a question in from Amraj. At what point would you advise IT to adopt the cloud? I think I kind of know where the answer is going to go on this. Is it better to move archived data out to the cloud first, or would you go with live data
Depends
first?
on, I think the answer is depends on what the cloud means to you.
Yeah.
So, you know, I have another business interest. We do a lot of development in the cloud because we can. It's a good place to run a fast DB instance for an hour. From an archiving perspective, what does archiving mean to you? Does archiving mean that actually what you want to do, it's tertiary stuff, and actually you want to put it somewhere cheaper? Is that what the cloud means to you? Or do you want it actually being a cheap line of business archive? I'm not actually answering the question with a definitive answer.
There isn't one.
But it does. Absolutely,
You're
it
saying
does
ask
depend
the right
on.
questions.
Well, no, it's not. He's asked the right question, but we need to be able to understand what does it mean to him, because every business answer is different.
We've got 2 minutes left.
Wow.
This does come into the... Yeah, I know it went fast, didn't it? It does come into the kinds of challenges that people approach. So I just threw this up very quickly, largely so we could just talk through some of the challenges that people are seeing right now.
Yeah. Unsurprisingly, you know, from the register audience, you know, it splits basically into two buckets. You know, what are the big considerations? You know, cost and risk. Yeah, we've talked about cost a lot of the time. Risk is an issue in there, and sometimes that risk is subliminal. You know, i.e., it's about availability, but we don't call it risk. The other parts are, you know, skills and resource considerations. You know, they are important, but, you know, it's the top two that really grab the attention, but you can't ignore the second two.
And I think that does boil down to the conversations that you're having. And the good news is we may be running up towards the end of this presentation, but we have talked about this a lot. It's about communication with the business.
It's about getting
breaking down those
everyone
silos.
talking, breaking down the silos, and also breaking cycles. You know, you're not going to do this if you keep the traditional way of doing stuff. Everything has to change in which to move that forward and become the enabler, not the problem and cost centre in the corner.
Yeah. The really important issue here is to stop procurement actually driving the bulldozer where they don't know where the bulldozer should go or what they're doing with the controls.
That's we
It's a
put
fantastic slide, John. Well done.
procurement down on the... We had a lot of conversations about who should be driving the bulldozer, as you can imagine. So if we were to say, okay, got all of that, world's a changing place, different kinds of things that I need to manage, etc., etc. And I'm going to start with you, Simon. When we go into conversations with people that are trying to solve these problems now, where do we start? How do we open up?
We're seeing some great engagements where we can get a chief operating officer to herd cats. If he can bring in procurement and he can get procurement to stand down to try not to save 50 pence. If he can get IT to be able to deliver their message to the business and the business to understand that message, and they both interact in the right way. So we're seeing some great COO conversations.
Start with the COO.
That's where we're seeing them at the moment.
Educate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. And James, what would you add to that?
To be fair, I would agree. You know, anyone that is senior enough to herd the cats and get people in a room is the first place to start. And sometimes you have to go and attack everyone differently to make sure everyone understands the message, and then find the one champion that's willing to bring anyone together. So it might not necessarily be someone senior, but someone that is willing to champion getting everyone in a room and getting everyone on the same page is going to get you to where you need to get to, I think.
Okay, Tony?
The audience heard me say this time after time after time. It's know where you're starting from, know where you need to get to, and make sure that you've got really good visibility on that.
Okay, from the business perspective.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much to our panellists. Here we are now, and I hope that we've entertained you as we leave you with some links that you can click on to give you further information about NGIT's offerings, about what HP brings to the party. HP, I did say HP. HP. And some more data from Freeform Dynamics if that should rock your boat. So thank you for tuning in, and see you next time.